one of the things that they keep going back to with every company that gets accepted into Y Combinator is build the most scrappiest version of what you can right now and test the idea.
Welcome back to another episode of Gaining the Technology Leadership Edge. Today, I have a guest. His name is Nash Sichon. Welcome to the show, Nash.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
So I see that you were involved in a startup. What can you tell us about that?
A colleague of mine, a friend of mine actually from university, and we decided to do something together. And the startup that we came up with was to build a tech platform that would eventually automate away a lot of the drug development workflows and life cycles to bring drugs to market faster. So he was a biotechnologist, my co-founder, and I come from the tech world. So we tried to mishmash the two of our skills as best as possible to ensure that we can try to shave away as much time as possible from getting a drug into market. Based off of our research that we did, we identified that drug development takes anywhere between 12 to 15 years, right, from the inception of the idea all the way to when it comes to the market, like for consumers like you and I. And upon investigating and talking to more researchers who are actually in the field, we identified that there's about 40 to 45% of the workflows that can be automated straight out of the bat. A lot of it had to do with data analysis, data collection, data reporting, and a bunch of other things that these scientists do in the course of drug development. And we realized that if we were able to get to at least 35 or 40%, we would be able to shave enough time to bring it down to about 8 years. And that was the motivation that caused us to start this company. The company was called SciSpot, and we pitched the idea to Y Combinator and got accepted.
Awesome. So what was that experience like? Because I've heard a couple of people talk about Y Combinator. What was that experience like for you?
I think for me, if I have to summarize it in like just a short line, it was an experience that was second to none. It was the most gratifying experience for me where a lot of the things that I was doing prior to getting into Y Combinator were part of my subconscious. Like, for example, I was always asking questions about, why are we doing this? Who's going to use this? And is there enough interest and how are they going to use it? Like asking all those questions as an engineer. But when you get to Y Combinator, they actually enforce this. They ask you to think about this explicitly, right? And all these thoughts that I was already doing, all these things I was already doing in my subconscious just came into my conscious brain. So it was kind of a validation for me that, I was on the right path already. I was kind of trained well as an engineer. So to get validation on the fact that I was doing that well, just allowed us to build our product even better, talk to users better, and make sure that we're building something that people actually wanted to use, as opposed to building something that we thought people would want to use, right? So that was the biggest takeaway from Y Combinator. But among other things, I mean, Y Combinator is such an enriching experience that it kind of just teaches you all about company building, product building, and also like how do you go out and pitch the idea? How do you sell it? How do you tell a story around the product or the idea itself? So a lot of things that I learned new, a lot of things that I got revalidated for myself. So for me, it was an experience second to none.
So it sounds like from what you're explaining to me that from beginning to end, if I would summarize what you said, they provided you with a process that they use that works to get you from point A to point B and get you out to market. And they had steps in there for you to think about, like, what the market's going to look like, what they want, what they don't want. Did it change anything about like the pain points you were trying to address?
So more than the process, I think it's about their experience, right? So they've seen a ton of startups come through, and they've seen a ton of startups try to solve a ton of different problems. And I think they are one of the things that they keep going back to with every company that gets accepted into Y Combinator is build the most scrappiest version of what you can right now and test the idea. People are willing to pay for your idea. And once you get a sense of what is working and what's not working, you can double down on that, right? You can double down on what's working and go ahead and build out a more scalable solution for it. I think in terms of our hypotheses, some of it was right on point. Some of it we had to change because as we started testing the waters with our idea, we had this grand vision of what we wanted to do, but we realized that the low-hanging fruit was something else, right? We could completely go after that low-hanging fruit and build our first version of the product, or our MVP, minimum viable product,
Mm-hmm.
around that particular low hanging fruit, and get a bunch of customers who could pay for this product, and then eventually expand on from there. So
So what do your customers say is the biggest benefit to your product?
I think the customers that we had were more interested in digitizing their entire research. I think that was the first mental block or roadblock that we had to cross. We had a bunch of challenges in general because historically, life sciences and biotech is an industry that hasn't really embraced the use of technology very well, right? Because a lot of the scientists who are doing cutting edge research today are in the age demographic of over 55 or 60. So when they started out after their PhDs or postdocs, there wasn't really any tech for them to embrace. So they've kind of done 25, 30 years of research just the way they've done it. And they've developed these processes that just have worked until this point. But now with the advent of machine learning and AI and a bunch of big data that's traveling all around the world, you need some revolution to come in, right? You need some tech revolution to come in. That's where I think we started stepping in. And one of the things that we noticed was this article in the Nature journal, which is a very prominent life science journal,
Mm-hmm.
that said that 70% of all life science research is practically not reproducible by another human being. And that kind of got us thinking as to why that would be the case. And when we read that paper, we were, I guess, our theory was validated to the point where it's because of lack of data standardization. So the first low hanging fruit we went after was to standardize data, to digitize data, and then to standardize it, right? So we had some customers who basically were capturing data on napkins because that's what was available in the lab. And the question is, how do you then, digitize that, and how do you make it consumable? Because we wanted to build a ton of stuff over and above that data for them. So those are the kinds of things that changed. And then it was also about, getting past the mental barrier of embracing tech. Because when you go to someone and say, hey, we have this product, it can do X, Y, and Z for you. And they're like, okay, but can it do A, B, and C as well? Because that's what I'm interested in. So then you're in this pivotal decision of like, do you just get the customer, acquire the customer for the sake of what they want, or is what they're asking for even in line with what you're thinking of doing? So we were always posed with that challenge of deciding whether we build something custom for someone or we kind of go more in a product-led strategy, right? So
That's interesting because years ago, I had an accounting department that was part of a company that I was a CTO for, and they wanted to digitize their past records. And same kind of thing, stuff on napkins. And what was funny was after I had a meeting about digitizing the things and how we would have to come up with a way to handle the things around napkins, the CFO, who was a much older gentleman who wasn't very tech savvy, came to me and he's like, here, we have this thumb drive. Everything's now on here. They'd taken photos of the napkins and put on them. That's not what we meant. So I chuckled when
we
you said napkins because I've had that exact experience.
yeah, we had a bunch of that, and then we had folks who were kind of using some of the folks actually were using like Google Suite, like Google Drive and Google Sheets and whatever. Some of them had this one server sitting in their like in their offices, which basically you could not even remote connect into to get the data off. So there were a bunch of challenges, right? Because everything is so destandardized, if that is even the correct word. And that was the biggest challenge that we had. Like, how do you get these folks to A, embrace the tech, and B, how do you standardize the data so that you can build something on top of it?
So you've been in the technology industry for close to 14 years. So
Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen a lot of different things. I want to kind of talk about just the environment for staff, for technical staff. What are some things that you've seen over your career that are problematic for tech staff?
I think the biggest problem that I would say is change, being able to embrace change. I think one of the things I learned very early on in my career is that change is the only constant, right? And the sooner you kind of you make peace with this idea in your head, the better it is for you to embrace change. And I say this because when I started out my career like 14 years ago, things were not as chaotic or as agile as they are today. Like companies make plans, but they rarely stick to them, right? It always reminds me of this quote that President Eisenhower had to say, where plans are important, but planning is important, but plans are useless, right?
Mhm.
So it's kind of what is the reality, to be honest. I think a lot of engineers were either early on or midway through their career and have not been around the block a lot, struggle to embrace change. So I think it's up to leaders, and I think this is something I've done as part of my leadership style as well, is to make space for that and kind of be empower people to realize that change is going to happen, and you're going to have to embrace it. And at the same time, if you fail in what you're doing, that's not the end of the world. Like you're not going to lose your job in most cases because you fail on something, right? So be more confident or be more, I guess, risk prone in a way. Be fearless. Essentially, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I actually my program, the decentralized A team method, one of the things, the ultimate goal is to cut the work hours of the tech executive. And one of many different things that I teach them to do is to empower their staff, because too many tech executives, in my opinion, they hire, say, like a database administrator. And then they want to get in there with the database administrator and be like, no, 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 don't make that the primary key. Make this the primary key. Don't do
Right.
this, do this. Let them do their job. You hired them because of their particular expertise, right? And if you don't empower them to like actually make decisions around that part of their job, then you're failing as the leader, because you're not supposed to be the one who does it all. And it's why a lot of tech executives work 80 to 100 hours a week, because they're doing everyone else's job, or maybe they're not doing the job, but they're getting involved in discussions that they don't really need to get involved in. They're supposed to be higher level, look down and let the other people do their thing, and step in when necessary with their experience, but just kind of let them be and let them do their job. And I think that word empower is one I use a lot, because it's true. You want, otherwise the staff's just going to continually come to you and say, hey, Nash, how do I do this? How do I do that? How do I do this? How do I do that? Let them go do it. I mean, I actually was telling someone today that I have a lead gen specialist, and she'll ask me questions, and she's worked for me long enough now that I'll say to her, read through the messages and you tell me what you think the answer is, because I don't want to give her the answer. I want her to learn to think it through. And that to me is one of the big things that leadership is lacking. What do you think about, like you mentioned, change is the only constant, and I totally agree with you. It's one of the things that's exciting about being part of the tech industry is the rapid change that continually happens. I mean, I was thinking about it the other day. The last time I actually wrote code, Angular 4 was the big guy in the block, and now it's like
Right.
Angular 14 or 15 or something like that. Like
Right.
it's crazy to me, and it hasn't been 10 years. It's only been maybe 4. So
Yeah.
like it just, things move fast. So with that kind of change, what kind of mindset do you need to have in order to survive in that environment?
I think you need to be curious, and you need to kind of always be looking out for what's coming out there. Is it even worth, like, so I think this is a two-sided answer, right? The first thing is you need to be aware of what's coming out there, how fast the industry is moving. And the second thing is you also need to be aware, or like have an understanding of whatever is new, is it as shiny as it looks, right? So a lot of people want to jump to the shiniest new object in the market, and that's not always the right thing to do either. So you need to have enough experience to be able to determine if, let's say, uh, moving to that shiny new technology is actually what your organization requires. Sometimes it's probably best to not change something if it's working well. And other times it might be required. So it's on a case by case basis. So, but the thing that is most important is to stay curious, right? To be aware of what's going on and to determine how best you can bring an impact if you want to use some of those new technologies at your organization.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. No need to change something if it's working correctly and you analyze it and you decide, yeah, that this will do. But like, I mean, I'm often reminded, like we talked about database administrator a little while ago, and I'm often reminded of conversations I've had with DBAs where they'll say, hold on, I need one more day and I can shave a millisecond off of this query. And I say, a millisecond? Who cares? We don't
Yeah,
need that. Let's keep
right.
going. No one is going to say, oh my gosh, that query was a millisecond too slow. Like, no one's going to say that. As
Right.
long as it's responsive and it's happening, we're good. So when it comes to leaders that you have worked with, what are like what's the number one trait that you see that makes them successful?
I think so. I want to kind of caveat this with an anecdotal piece of evidence that I've actually had 17 managers in the past 14 years, and that is quite a lot for me to based on some of my peers. So I've had a very close look at different styles of leadership, and for me, I think what used to work best for me, and what still works best for me, is to feel empowered, to feel that I'm part of the decision making process, right? And to be having some level of control on what I'm working on, which is also kind of what I have instilled into my own leadership style, which I like to call constrained autonomy, where I think it's a de facto methodology of trust. You empower and you trust your individuals on your team to do the best that they can do because they're there for a reason, right? So it's blind trust. You give it before you receive it from them, and over time, you have all these managerial tools to kind of curate that trust and to see whether you dial it up or you dial it down based on how the individual performs. But the whole point of constrained autonomy is to provide a set of constraints to every individual on your team based on their level of experience and how junior or senior they are or how skilled they are. And within those constraints, you let them be autonomous. You completely allow them to make decisions. And the good decisions you celebrate, obviously. The not so good decisions you use as learning opportunities. I've seen this work really well for any team that I've led, and also for leaders who have used similar tactics when I was an engineer. It really brought the best out of me, made me learn from my mistakes because I felt like I was the one making the decisions as opposed to being told that, hey, go do this, and then it failed or whatever. But getting people to, and I always like to kind of give an analogy of the movie Inception, because that's exactly what happens in that too, right? So Leonardo DiCaprio kind of plants the seed of the idea in the CEO to dissolve his own company, and it feels at the end of the movie that it's kind of his own decision, right? So he makes peace with it and he's okay with it. I think that's exactly what you need to give engineers. You need to make them feel that whatever decision they're making is entirely their own. And I think that's what I've learned, and that's what I kind of practice in my leadership style.
Yeah, that's awesome. I actually believe in a decentralized management approach. So what that means is just like we said, empower the staff, have a very clear job description around what their role is, have them do their roles, but then having a monthly meeting where you talk with your staff about all the things that are going on. And what I always used to do is what's working and what's not working, and have these giant post-it notes up on the wall, and
Right.
one would say what's working, one would say what's not working, and then there'd be this list of things that aren't working. And then let's say, just to give as an example, let's say that some people are having problems with the phones, and so the phone server has an issue, and the network administrator is probably the one who's going to deal with it. But I might take the lead developer and give them the responsibility for running the, in quotes, project of fixing that. And
Yeah.
at first they look at me like, I'm a lead developer, I know nothing about this. Why are you having me do this? Because I want you to be the point person to drive everyone else to get things done. If there's a meeting that needs to be set up, you set it up. That way, the tech guy can work on the tech. You're
Right.
working on the project. But what it also did was it exposed the lead developer to what the network administrator had to go through in order to get from point A to point B and fix the problem. And they
Yeah.
worked together as a team. He held the network administrator accountable, and vice versa. And so so that's why it's decentralized. There is no leader sitting in the middle driving all that, other than the meeting where you make the assignment and then later where you follow up and see the results, right?
That is
I
so
think
true.
that's a I think that's a huge approach, because then I can walk out, if I'm the leader, I can walk out of the office and go home and that stuff's just happening. It doesn't
Correct.
need me to make it happen. I think it's huge. Um, what's your favorite part about working in the tech industry?
The fact that things keep changing and the fact that the newer tech that keeps coming out almost on a daily basis now is just like designed or like geared to improving the quality of life in some way or the other, right? Uh, I think since I started in the industry 14 years ago, we've come a long way to a point where uh, computers have become the de facto. Smartphones have become the de facto. Everyone's basically moved from a larger screen to a smaller screen, at least on commute or in transit. And you can do so much with your phone now that it's crazy, and it's only getting worse, right? Or better, the way depending on how you look at it. To a point where like I think companies like Apple want to eventually do away with the MacBooks and kind of make the iPad
Yeah.
the next computer. So and then probably they'll do something with the phones in the future as well to make that an even more powerful computing device. So that those are just examples, and obviously the VR and AR space is its own beast that's being explored by various companies at this point. So I think at this point it's so interesting to be in this tech space that there's you can never grow tired of the amount of technology that's coming out. Some of it's great, some of it is not so great, and I think that's going to be the case with any industry for that matter.
Sure. I'm one of those people who's moved away from, like, I have a desktop machine that I keep here at my desk, and I don't use a laptop anymore. I have an iPad, and I even have some software installed on my desktop to reach out to it if I need to, but I can do what I need to do
Yeah,
with just an iPad, and it's so much easier to travel with. Like, I went to Canada for a week, and instead of having to lug this heavy laptop, and then what's interesting is customs, when they see a laptop, they really scrutinize you. But when they see an
right.
iPad, they're just kind of like, oh, iPad, okay, go. Um, that's kind of interesting. So I have a question for you about just your thoughts on the future of AI, and whether you think it's a good thing or a bad thing, and why.
So I think the future of AI is definitely promising. I'll start by saying that it's promising to the extent that there's a lot that can be done with it that can be very beneficial to certain verticals of the industry. For example, there's companies trying to use it to diagnose, conditions, medical conditions or diseases. That is definitely a great, promising piece of research and development that's going on there. There's also this piece on the other side of the spectrum, which is like AI that is mimicking or impersonating artists and doing a bunch of things, which I don't know if it's the best for society, right? And then there's somewhere in the middle, which is the way I look at it, at least, is self-driving cars, which sounds extremely interesting. And I used to work at Lyft in the self-driving department, so I've even had the chance of like taking a ride with these and seeing how they work. The problem there is more, I feel, not the technology itself, but also the regulatory aspect, where there's so many things that go on in that particular space, where like there's so many unanswered questions where policymakers have to now decide if there's two self-driving cars in an accident, who's liable? Who's the insurance company going to reimburse, right? If there's a cop that's trying to, write a ticket for someone, who gets the ticket? There's so many things about this that are so wrong. But at the same time, the tech itself is very promising to a point where like companies like Tesla allow you to, in some cities now, do full self-driving, right? So you can essentially just hop in the car, barely touch your steering wheel, and get from point A to point B under normal circumstances. So I feel for me, it depends on the vertical of the industry in which we're talking about AI. Some verticals have a lot of promise, like medicine, like self-driving cars, and generating images and doing all that. But I think it's the artists and anything related to art that is extremely scary at this point. I was actually watching a video on YouTube yesterday by one of these, you know, these people I follow. Her name is Cleo Abram. She does a fantastic series of videos called Huge If True, and one of the most recent episodes was like Spotify is now. She actually got the CEO of Spotify to talk as well about this, and she was basically talking about AI generating music in the voice of an actual artist who's on Spotify. So the question now is, who gets the royalty? Does the artist get the royalty, or does the creator
Yeah.
using the tool get the royalty? So that's what scares me. And if we move into a world where music becomes AI predominantly, I think folks like me are probably going to lose interest in music, which is a huge part of my life. So that's what scares me about it. But the other side also, keeps me really excited.
Yeah, it's interesting. We moved to Vegas about a year and a half ago, and we made a lot of friends, just happened to be musicians. And I was talking to one guy who's a bass player, and he was saying that the AI music thing scares him because of these very things. Like there's services that musicians can sign up for, and not give the people anything. Just say, I want a song, I want it in this genre, I want it to be this kind of tempo, I want it to be more upbeat, downbeat, whatever. And then
Right.
poof, they push out a song for them. And then all they have to do is, put lyrics to it, and they've got a song. And he says, but what's going to happen is down the road, when that song hits it big, somebody's going to be coming with their hand out saying, you owe me
Exactly.
money. And so I think the law has to catch up with that. But I mean, it's no different than like we're having this issue across the United States where different states are legalizing marijuana,
Mm-hmm.
but then companies are drug testing and refusing people to have a job because they have marijuana in their system, which was legal for them to have. So the laws have to catch up. And once the laws
Right.
catch up, then things will be comfortable. For what it's worth, I mean, the self-driving cars kind of scare me too, because although I think they're going to get to the point where they'll be rule followers. They won't be able
Yeah.
to go faster than the posted speed limit. But I think they're going to need some help from, road departments. Whoever's building the
Yeah.
roads. The speed limit sign is going to need to have some kind of an electronic device that tells the car what the speed limit is at that point. Because I can think of there's a spot when you come from the airport in Canada. You're driving, and then you go, all of a sudden you're in this rural area, and so the speed just goes crazy, and then
Yeah.
you're getting close to a town and it comes way slow, and then it's faster and slower and faster and slower and faster and
Right.
slower. The AI driven car is not going to know what the heck to do with that unless there's some signal, and it'll get there. But
Exactly.
right now it's scary. I mean, I live in Vegas, where I don't know if you know this, but they're the worst drivers on earth. And if they I'd be kind of afraid to see them dealing with a self-driving car that's expecting to make that left turn and not be bothered, and then they're
Yeah.
going to cut them off, and then there's going to be an accident. So
Actually, if you were to go to the strip in Vegas, you would be able to take a self-driving ride.
yeah, underground though.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's underground for a reason.
Yeah.
But he's actually expanding, Elon Musk's actually expanding that tunnel system here. It's going to be
Right.
interesting, to say the least. I think there's some people who wish that it was in place now for some of this Formula One issue that we're having here. We have massive problems with that. But anyway, well, this has been an interesting conversation. I really appreciate your time here. Could you let our listeners know how they can find you if they want to reach out?
Sure. So you can find me on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn handle is Nash S. So definitely search for me, and happy to connect with anyone who's interested.
Awesome. Well, again, really appreciate you being here. It was a great conversation. Thanks everybody for tuning in to Gaining the Technology Leadership Edge. Please come back next week for yet another episode.
Thanks for having me, Mike.